I'm going to continue methodically going along in this dependent origination as we had started before. Reflection about nama rupa, which is called name and form. This is a passage in the what's called the Maha Vedala Sutta in the middle-length discourses given by Venerable Sariputta. Sometimes these definitions of things are frustrating because it's difficult to make them come into accordance with our actual experience. We don't experience these mental, especially the mental phenomenon or even the physical phenomenon, as being like entries in a dictionary. So like say in your body, you have the earth element and the water element and the heat element. But you don't find the earth filed under E and the water filed under W. It's all together as part of the same flesh. And same thing with the mental phenomenon. You sometimes see these lists, and sometimes you see a kind of like a progressive list that this factor leads onto that factor and leads onto another factor. But then as we practice in meditation, we might experience things in a different sequence or a different order, or it's more like getting a taste, like when you have the soup, sometimes you can taste the lemon, or sometimes you can taste the salt, and they're all blended into the same soup, which is our experience. So the question here was about wisdom and consciousness. Are wisdom and consciousness mixed, or are they separate? Can we completely dissect them so as to see the difference between them? And the answer is wisdom and consciousness are mixed and not separate. You can never completely dissect them so as to describe the difference between them. For you understand what you cognize, and you cognize what you understand. That's why they're mixed and not separate. You can never completely dissect them or describe the difference between them. Wisdom and consciousness, what is the difference between these things that are mixed and not separate? The difference between them, wisdom should be developed, while consciousness should be completely understood. And then there's a feeling. Feeling is what you feel. Feeling is something that feels. Perception is called perception because it perceives. Can feeling, perception, and consciousness be completely dissected to describe the difference between them? No, they're mixed and not separate. For you perceive what you feel and you cognize what you perceive. These things are mixed and not separate. So this is just to encourage how to approach some of these teachings that are given to us that seem very academic, and you don't know like what the relevance is to our practice. How can we use these things in meditation? I say the teachings are given in a different context, presented like very similar ideas are presented in a slightly different way, even with slightly different words, according to what the point that they're making, what you should take from it, how you should use it. And now I'll give you an example about this nama rupa, which is called name and form. Name and form is a summary of the individual person. So you could say, instead of saying this is a person, that's a person, that's a person, you could say this is one name and form, another name and form, another name and form. an individual. It's not, the Buddha is definitely saying that an individual is a real thing. It's not just a convenient, conventional description that it's convenient to call them an individual. But that's not real, that they're not really an individual. Really, they're just a manifestation of something else. No, I think the Buddha is saying it's real helpful to see individuals and to know, to recognize that we experience ourselves as being a person, an individual. So in the Paticca Samuppada, or the dependent origination, it talks about how the individual comes to be born. At the beginning of this teaching, it talks about in the past, there was ignorance or the lack of wisdom. There were the volitional formations that were creating karmas in the past. So there's this accumulation of karma by way of the sankharas, or the formations, and there is a consciousness which knows those formations and is also touched by them in a way. So you could look this up. Is consciousness karmically wholesome, karmically unwholesome, or karmically neutral? Okay, does anybody know the answer? Raise your hand if you know the answer. Okay, well, it depends. If you're in the process of doing something wholesome and you're aware of that, then that consciousness, which has that awareness of a wholesome thing, is a wholesome consciousness. If you're in the process of committing a crime, and then there's a consciousness connected with that, and that consciousness is unwholesome. So it's completely, colored by what it's connected to. Consciousness becomes the nutriment or the force or the power that comes across upon the dissolution of a previous life, with the breakup of that life, the breakup of those khandhas, the breakup of that nama rupa. Then the consciousness, it comes across, and according to the karma that it carries, it will descend into a suitable place, the womb or the egg, or the place which is ready for a new life. And then it says, the metaphor they give is the consciousness is like a seed. Okay, so the seed has got complete information about what the future of that plant is going to be, right? If it's an oak tree, it's got one kind of seed. If it's rice, it has a different kind of seed. So the seed has got the complete story within it. So the same way that consciousness, with the karmic imprint that it's carrying, is carrying the complete story. And then the name and form comes out of the consciousness like a sprout comes out of the seed. So this is how the miracle of life, or whatever, is happening, and how the life that we find ourselves in can seem to be so, particular and so framed in by circumstances. So that's one way of looking at it. Another way of looking at it, we find very frequently in the text that nama rupa is virtually the same as the 5 aggregates: form, feeling, volitional formations, perception, volitional formations, and consciousness. And those are 5 aspects of our experience that a person may cling to, which becomes their identity. And or you could say that clinging to those five aggregates, clinging and identifying with those five aggregates as being myself, is a concise summary of why we suffer. Namarupa is sometimes given as virtually the same thing. So then within, here we are now, we've got the life that we have, the mind we have, the awareness that we have, everything that we've got right now. We definitely can experience this entire mental life, which is interior to us, which is has this quality of being uniquely private to us. Like we experience our own thoughts and our own consciousness. It's very vivid to us how we know our personal mind. But without psychic powers, it's very difficult for you to actually really know my mind. And even a person who has some psychic powers might know a person's mind in a very sort of like a general way, but not really in the full detailed richness of our internal existence. So we have this. It's definitely it's a real phenomenon. This inner life of the mind, which is inextricably bound up with being connected to this flesh. All of the things on the inside of the body, which are energetically going through the life process that they have with the different organs of the body doing their jobs, and the nervous system doing its job, and the heart doing its job, and the brain is really part of the nervous system. Or you could say the big brain that includes the stuff up here as well as the brain we have in the belly, and the whole nervous system doing what it does. And out of that whole process, the mind emerges and is experienced by us as it is. So what's the value of knowing about this? What are we supposed to do with this? Well, my idea is that with our own individual self, there's a tendency to reify the self, by which I mean taking some limited aspect of how we identify ourselves and taking the ownership of it, taking the identification of it, and saying, this is me. So there's making it into like a firm, definite, separate object. But in fact, this nama rupa, or this five aggregates, or this name and form, is not really a simple thing. It's a compounded thing, which continues to exist moment by moment, depending on the continuation of all these processes that are happening internally to us and externally to us. And even the whole mental process, it's a compounded thing in the sense that it has different aspects, that there are, perceptions and there are feelings. And the perceptions are affected by the feelings, and the feelings are affected by the perceptions, and the decisions are affected by both of them, and it's all intermingled together, as the passage that I read earlier. You can't really separate the parts because they're all operating together in tandem, but nevertheless, it is a compounded thing that has different parts and different aspects. You could have a trip and fall accident and bump your head, and you could lose one of those pieces. And nevertheless, this Namarupa would somehow or other reformulate itself as being like a car with three wheels or something like that, even though one of the major elements is is not functioning, it still kind of bumps along and it continues to have an existence and continues to identify and to experience itself as being an individual, as being a person, as being a consciousness that say, this is me. And what's more, we can see how this name and form, it's not only internal to what's within the boundaries of this skin, but it's also defined by external factors. So the society that we live in, the family where we grew up, the friends and relations that we associate with, and how we are interacting with them has this powerful influence on how we experience ourselves. Even if we experience that our life is possible or our life is not possible, or being in a very stressful and antagonistic or dysfunctional external environment can become traumatized. Then one's internal sense of the self can become very dysfunctional, very threatened, very powerfully affected by that. And even we can, with our imagination, we can extend that beyond the immediate surrounding that we encounter and realize that our life is part of this web of existence that includes all the beings in the whole universe. There's this interconnection, or all of the life forms in this whole world are all interconnected. And without the life of the whole ecosystem, our life is not possible anymore. And so in the traditional teachings, another way of seeing the interdependence of the internal and the external is when you consider the sense faculties. So there's the internal eye, which is, I guess you could say, a physical rupa of the eye. And there is a visible object, which is external, an external rupa. And with the conjunction of the seeing faculty and the external rupa, there arises the I consciousness, which is the mental aspect. And from the triple conjunction of those three things is a contact, which is the starting point for having an experience. Now, did that external visible object exist before I saw it? The answer is yes. Okay, you know, who knows? The visible object that we know, the one that we experienced, actually is the result of this triple conjunction. So it's like, I think in science, they found out that the data is changed by the act of the observation causes a change in the data. So actually the visible object, as far as what we experience or what we can know, it's not that the visible object is an absolute thing that is what it is. Instead, our experience of that object is relative. It's experienced by the combination of what we bring to it and what that object brings to us. And so with this idea, we can become much more like a pliable and sort of provisional in how we see or how we experience the external things in our life and how we make decisions about them. Because we can question, is this really true? Is what I see, what I experience, what I think it is? That's determined by, invariably determined by whatever wisdom or lack of wisdom, or bias or lack of bias, or whatever that I'm bringing to the experience. And we can also see very clearly that since we know that we are constantly changing, that our experience of the external things will be changing. So then, when I think that I can't stand how that so-and-so always does that to me, then I can know that this is not really a characteristic of that so-and-so. It's really a characteristic that's codependently arising from the encounter between my internal and then the external of that other person in this example. And so this is another way that we can use the idea of nama rupa to see, like, it's relative, it's not absolute. Nothing that we encounter is absolute and permanent and always going to be what we think it is. And by the way, why we are interested in knowing and classifying these objects in our world, whether they be the objects that external to us, or whether they be the aspects or parts of the body or parts of the mind that we are classifying internally. It's interesting, isn't it, how the mind is interested in classifying and naming different aspects of things? My idea is that actually the human is not just interested in seeing and classifying things because of curiosity, or we're not like a human encyclopedia writer who's just collecting definitions to put in our dictionary, to put in our encyclopedia. Instead, we classify things because of what we want to do. What do we need to do? When I'm not sure what it is, I'm not sure what I need to do. But then when I recognize what it is, then I know what to do. So if I see a vehicle in the distance coming down the road and I don't know what it is, I don't know what it is, I don't know what it is, and then I see, oh, that's the bus. And then I put my hand up and wave because I want to take the bus. Or if it's not the bus, then it's not the bus, and I don't have to do anything. I can just stand there. If it's food, I can think about eating it. If it's poison, I can think about not eating it. It's just my belief that from the fundamental drive that we have to continue our existence, that we like to recognize and classify and remember all the different things in our lives, all the different beings in our lives, in ways that will help us to continue our existence, that being the basic drive. But when we get the wisdom and we question these assumptions, does it really have the significance, or does it have a different significance altogether? So if I have the wisdom about karma, for example, I might experience things and beings and people as occasions for doing something skillful or doing something unskillful. And I might be, if I'm a good Buddhist, I would really not want to do something unskillful, because I really, really, really don't want to mess up my spiritual program and mess up my chances in the next life by accumulating unskillful deeds. And so I would go like at any cost, just, even if I'm putting my comfort or my existence in danger, let me at least avoid doing unskillful comments. So that's like a complete shift in the perception of everything and what the significance is because of having a different view about it. With this idea of taking nama rupa as being something that came into being at the beginning of this life as a result of the preceding karma, which is not an absolute unchanging thing, but is something that is constantly changing, constantly in flux, constantly flowing because of circumstances, and something which is only going to exist for not more than 120 years, maybe not more than 100 years, not more than 80 years, maybe not even until tomorrow, that this nama rupa will come to an end, but that whatever the accumulated karma is can go forward. So that's my thought about the significance, or like this teaching, or what it says in the text you can find about nama rupa. My question is, okay, so what am I supposed to do with this? Having heard this teaching, it's not only having heard this teaching, I know this, but having heard this teaching, I have the motivation to do something. And in this case, to not fall into the trap of thinking something is permanent when it's impermanent, and not fall into the trap of thinking that it's unchanging when it's constantly changing, not to fall in the trap of thinking that it's separate and independent when actually it's contingent and completely dependent on so many conditions. I'm going to stop here and allow a few minutes for your wonderful comments and questions.